Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
A lightning strike has completely destroyed a mural of George Floyd in Toledo, Ohio. The freak occurrence happened Tuesday afternoon during a storm. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
This mural in memory of George Floyd was painted by Ohio artist David Ross almost exactly 1 year ago. Now, as seen in this video, it's been reduced to rubble by a lightning strike. Witnesses told Toledo police that a lightning strike hit the mural during a storm Tuesday afternoon, destroying it. Doppler radar backs up the claim, showing that a strike hit around 4:30 p.m. near where the mural was painted. As seen in these images, the brick around and behind Floyd's face is still standing. One city building inspector said the collapse could have been caused by old age and deterioration. He added that inspectors recently found a bow in the middle of the wall. The Toledo Fire and Rescue Department, however, officially filed the cause as a lightning strike. Numerous social media users have reacted to the news by interpreting the lightning strike as symbolic or a divine message, with some saying they thought the mural was struck down because Floyd's name and image has been used for political purposes. However, some users called this interpretation superstitious. Several Toledo residents expressed sadness over the loss of the mural to local news networks, saying the mural meant something to them personally. City officials say they will work with the Arts Commission on planning a new mural, adding they were heartbroken to see the artist's work collapse. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
The family of a black man is filing a $30 million lawsuit after he was shot and killed in April by sheriff's deputies in Elizabeth City, North Carolina.
The victim's family says Andrew Brown Jr. died because of the officer's intentional and reckless disregard of his life. Brown was killed while sheriff's deputies were serving drug-related warrants at his home. The deputies surrounded Brown in his BMW before he tried to flee the scene. They fired several shots at and into his vehicle. He was killed by a bullet to the back of his head.
This lawsuit was easy to draft because the facts in this case is very easy that anybody can see. This is an unlawful killing, a murder of Andrew Brown.
Back in May, however, a county district attorney ruled that the fatal shooting was justified.
Mr. Brown's death, while tragic, was justified because Mr. Brown's actions caused 3 deputies with the Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office to reasonably believe it was necessary to use deadly force.
He had also said that none of the officers involved in the incident will be criminally charged. In the body cam footage, the deputies can be seen arriving at Brown's home where he is already seated in his BMW. After they surrounded his car, Brown takes off by steering his car through the lawn toward a road. The officers opened fire from behind, which resulted in Brown's death. The family's attorney says they now seek compensatory and punitive damages for his death through the lawsuit.
4 Iranians alleged to be intelligence operatives for Tehran are charged with plotting to kidnap a New York journalist. According to a Justice Department indictment, the journalist was critical of Iran. Here are the details.
U.S. prosecutors have charged 4 Iranians alleged to be intelligence operatives for Tehran. They're accused of plotting to kidnap a New York journalist and human rights activist who was critical of Iran. That's according to a Justice Department indictment unsealed on Tuesday. Prosecutors said the Iranian operatives had researched how they might spirit the journalist out of New York on a high-speed boat headed for Caracas. Iranian-American journalist Masih Alinjad contributed to the U.S. government-funded Voice of America Persian language service and reports on human rights issues in Iran. Here she shows her Twitter followers the police outside her apartment.
The police have been around my place for the past 2 weeks now. When I asked them why they were here, they told me it was to protect me. This is also what the FBI told me. They said they'd tell me later, but that the police has to be here often. They're here from 5 a.m. to midnight. I'm so not used to being protected by the police. Every time I see them, I assume they're here to arrest me. Yes, I'm also worried. I see them often, even when I get out to check on my flowers in my garden. But it imbues me with the feeling of safety when I see the police protecting me. This wouldn't have happened in my homeland. It's a weird feeling.
US authorities said in recent years, Iranian intelligence officers have tricked a number of overseas activists to travel to destinations where they are kidnapped and sent back to Iran. In 2019, Iranian intelligence officers lured Ruhollah Zam, a journalist living in France, out of the country, capturing and later executing him in Iran on sedition charges. Reuters reached Al-Anjad after the indictment was released. She said she was in a state of shock. She said she had been working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation since the agency approached her 8 months ago with photographs taken by the plotters. She said the Islamic Republic had gotten very close. Iran rejected the claims as ridiculous and baseless.
A software engineer living in Michigan recounts his horrific experiences before he fled from China. He was jailed and tortured for over 8 years simply because of his beliefs. Here are the details.
I was born in Shandong Province, China, 1973. In 1996, I got my bachelor's degree and was recommended to pursue a doctorate at Tsinghua University. The next year, I started practicing Falun Gong.
During the International Religious Freedom Summit in Washington, D.C., Weiyu Wang shared his experience in China practicing Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. It's a spiritual discipline and meditation practice based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. It was first introduced to the public in 1992, and by 1999, there were an estimated 70 million to 100 million practitioners in China. As the number of adherents grew, party leader Jiang Zemin began brutally persecuting Falun Gong practitioners on July 20, 1999. It's widely believed Jiang felt threatened that there were more people practicing Falun Gong than there were members of the party. After that, Wang was publicly condemned by his classmates under the instruction of a party leader at Tsinghua University.
I still cannot forget the face of my close friend, who stood up and threatened me. If you keep your belief in Falun Gong, I will stab you to death. I was very astonished at that time. I had no idea that propaganda could change a person in such a dramatic way.
Wang refused to give up his beliefs and was therefore forced to suspend his schooling twice and give up his doctorate degree. In August 2002, he was kidnapped by CCP security personnel on the streets.
They knocked my glasses off my face and then stepped on my head. This violence surprised the passersby, and some of them stopped and watched. The assailants told the pedestrians that I was a thief. I shouted back, I'm a Falun Gong practitioner, not a thief. They were so scared at my words, they quickly covered my mouth and stuffed me into a car.
Wang was sent to a secret location that detained only Falun Gong practitioners, called the Legal Training Center. There he was beaten and tortured non-stop from 6 p.m. until 5 a.m. the next day.
I was shocked all over my body, including all 10 fingertips, and they even pierced 2 electrodes into my back. The authorities would jump to smash my head with their elbows, called me a counter-revolutionist, and shouted with glee to scorch every inch of skin.
Wang was jailed and tortured for 6 months before he was sent to a detention center in Beijing. In 2004, he was sentenced to 8 years of prison and sent to Changjin Prison in Tianjin. There, some prisoners who were murderers and drug traffickers were chosen to monitor Falun Gong practitioners 24 hours a day.
We were forced to labor outside, planting radishes, weeding, digging, or do factory work like wrapping candies, making paper muffin cups, or sports balls like volleyballs. While sewing those balls by hand, a practitioner pierced his eyeball with the iron crochet by accident, because we didn't have any protective equipment.
After 14 years of suffering under the CCP's persecution, Wang fled the country for the United States. But sadly, many of his fellow practitioners at Tsinghua University are still being persecuted for their faith. Wang said there is one thing that the CCP is afraid of, the voices of justice. He says that's because darkness is always afraid of being exposed to the light.
And Vice President Kamala Harris met with the Texas Democratic lawmaker in Washington, D.C. She said their act was courageous, comparing them to the men and women who shed blood to help pass the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Meanwhile, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is calling on Democrats to stop with the misinformation. Here's NTD's Jason Perry with more on that.
President Biden said the recent voting bills passed by Republicans has brought about the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. This as Vice President Harris met with Texas Democratic lawmakers who fled to Washington, D.C. to prevent a vote on the latest voting reform bill. She praised the Texas lawmakers for their courage.
In line with the legacy of everyone from Frederick Douglass, who's over my right shoulder, when he fought for the right of black men to vote in America, to the legacy that includes all those women who marched down Pennsylvania Avenue for women's right to vote, to all of those folks who shed their blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge to make sure that we would in 1965 pass the Voting Rights Act.
According to the Wall Street Journal, the Texas bill will effectively end drive-through voting, which was enacted due to the pandemic. It will also end 24-hour voting, but expand voting hours while making mail-in voters identify themselves. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton spoke on Fox News and said the whole point of the bills is to prevent voter fraud. He explained that Texas works to make it easy for voters to show ID.
We allow for 2 weeks of early voting. We allow for 7 different forms of ID. We'll give you an ID if you can't afford an ID. No one is without an ID. We also know that IDs are used, across all types of different situations, from getting on an airline to going to a hotel to getting government benefits. And so we're not asking one group to give a form of ID and another not to. Everyone has to prove who they are so that we can verify that the right people are voting.
But Senator Raphael Warnock has a different interpretation of the bills. He says the fight against people's right to vote is a good reason to federalize elections.
We've got to have federal standards that push against what we are seeing in Texas and what we are seeing in Georgia. This is a shameless, unabashed assault on people's voting rights.
Governor Abbott clarified the purpose of the Texas voter reform bills.
President Biden and the Democrats must stop the misinformation. Texas is very simply making it easier to vote and harder to cheat.
Senate Democrats are planning to go on the road for the first time in over 20 years. The Senate Rules Committee is going to Georgia to stand against the recent voting reform bills passed there. They say the Georgia voting reform bill was also trying to suppress voting rights. Jason Perry, NTD News.
And a California Senate bill that would restructure California's criminal justice system is advancing through the Public Safety Committee. It would set bail at $0 for a wide range of criminal charges.
In a 5-2 vote, California Senate Bill 262 passed through the State Assembly's Public Security Committee. It will remove the authority of judges to use their discretion in setting bail. Instead, bail will be set at $0 for all offenses except for certain felonies. State Senator Robert Hertzberg introduced SB 262.
We again didn't want to get out there on a limb. We didn't want to get out there and be stupid and have everybody beat us up and say, Hertzberg, you're inventing this world and it doesn't work. We wanted to show something that worked.
The bill's current language would exclude crimes such as assault with force that will likely cause bodily injury, witness intimidation, hate crimes, human trafficking, and child abuse. Former California State Senator and retired Judge Quentin Kopp views the bill as a watered-down version of a bill Hertzberg previously authored.
It's the same ingredients. It's a repetition. This system has been condemned in states which have used it. It is a bill of goods being peddled, and the whole notion of zero bail is contrary to American legal history.
Proponents of bail reform argue that buying one's way out of jail is unconstitutional.
On March 25th, 2021, the Supreme Court of the state of California, in a unanimous decision, held that the common practice of conditioning freedom solely on whether the arrestee can afford bail is unconstitutional.
The director of the American Bail Coalition warns that removing bails is not considering others involved in the judicial process.
The staff of the committee pointed out that the zero bail and binding judicial discretion is a problem, and that we need to take this danger to the community into account when setting bail and not take that tool away from judges.
Clayton says the bill is a potential threat to the tens of thousands of jobs related to the bail industry in California.
As is, I think there's no bail industry in California under this bill.
During the lockdown, California has released arrestees with zero bail to slow the spread of COVID-19, also known as the CCP virus. Crime across California has increased, including the San Francisco Sheriff's Office reporting that 55% of alleged criminals reoffended before trial. Analysts say SB 262 is expected to pass the legislature after more revisions.
A California Senate bill that incentivizes people to stay sober is making its way through the legislature. But critics are skeptical of its ethical implications. NTD's Jason Blair with more on that.
California's Senate Bill 110 will employ a drug rehabilitation method called contingency management. According to lawmakers, this therapy method uses positive reinforcement as a form of treatment, mainly for people suffering from methamphetamine addiction.
What contingency management it's a therapy developed with 30 years of scientific research. It provides incentives that increase in value in exchange for biological samples, either urine or saliva, that document drug abstinence.
Senator Scott Wiener, who introduced the bill, says the therapy is frequently used by the Veterans Affairs Administration and has proven to be the most effective method of treatment for methamphetamine addiction. Veterans involved in this treatment can participate in raffles based on their abstinence. Longer periods of abstinence allow for more drawings, which range in rewards from words of encouragement to $100.
What we know about contingency management, it is the most powerful treatment for stimulant use disorder, full stop.
However, some clinicians and researchers have expressed concerns over the therapy, saying it is similar to bribery and that it is unethical to pay people for what they should be doing anyway. Other leaders are concerned that Medi-Cal covering contingency management therapy could violate federal laws made to prevent kickbacks for doing specific medical treatment. Wiener argues that the bill does not violate these laws. The bill passed unanimously in both the State Senate and Assembly Health Committee and will next be re-referred to the Committee on Appropriations. If passed, contingency management will be a covered form of treatment under California's state-sponsored medical program, Medi-Cal. Jason Blair, NTD News, San Francisco.
Navigating a world of economic madness, you need to have the right guide. What do today's decisions mean for your tomorrow? We ask why. What's the alternative? Uncover the deeper reasons and the hidden influences, and highlight the real opportunities for profit. At NTD Business, we connect the dots for you. Good evening. Thanks for joining us.